Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Federal Updates podcast. This is Roger Harris, and I'm joined as always with Annie Schwab. Annie, how are you doing today?
Hey, Roger. I'm doing great. A nice long weekend for me. The kids are back in school today, so we're filming this in the middle of January, towards the end of January, and I'm feeling like tax season is here. I'm feeling the pressure, feeling the pain almost.
Yeah, it's right around the corner. I don't know about Texas, but it's cold in Georgia, and we're supposed to get snow and ice, so we'll probably shut down the world around us for a few
We'll
days
be
because
right behind you. We're
we
supposed to get
we have
snow on
no idea
Saturday,
what to
and
do when we get snow and ice in Georgia other than stay home. So hopefully we'll do that. Um, we are into a new year. We're recording this right after the MLK weekend, and I think we've beat the big beautiful bill about as far as we can go from a technical standpoint, but there's other things that will impact how filing season works for us. And a lot of that happens or could happen or doesn't happen. It can be any of the above in Washington, D.C. So we thought it would be a good time to bring back one of our frequent guests and a good friend in Thad Inge from Van Stoyk and Associates to give us an update on what Congress may or may not do to impact filing season, what may or may not happen at the IRS. So, Thad, Happy New Year and welcome back.
Happy New Year. Glad to be here. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So, we're all trying to get over a long weekend. I heard Thad was at how many basketball games this weekend?
14 basketball games.
14 basketball games. Annie, you had basketball games too this weekend?
I did, but not 14. We had soccer and basketball, and let's be honest, I think everybody watched the game last night. So,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's been a good weekend for sports.
Yeah. Well, now we have to switch over to the real world. And if you don't remember who Thad is, as I said, he's a vice president with Van Stoyk and Association. He represents Padgett and NAEA in DC and knows all things Washington, Congress, IRS. He's our go-to guy for things that are going on. I'll actually be seeing him in a day or two, and we'll touch on that and why that's to take place. But again, welcome, Thad.
Great. Thank you.
So tell us, what have you been doing lately?
Besides
Give
going
us
to
the
14
lowdown on what
basketball
your
games.
life is like in
You know,
DC.
It's an interesting January because normally the end of the year is where a lot of the action is. Sometimes you have a funding bill or a must-pass bill that has to get done by December 31st, and so Congress is staying, until right up until Christmas, smelling the jet fumes, trying to cut a deal to either fund the government or extend a program. But when we came out of the shutdown in the fall, they did a continuing resolution until January 30th. So it bought them a little time in terms of funding the government, avoiding the next shutdown or potential one,
Right.
and gave themselves a break over the Christmas holidays. Now, there were a few things that expired at the end of the year. We all heard about the Affordable Care Act premium tax credits
Right.
that were expiring. And so there was an effort at the end of the year to get those extended. That did not happen. They're still working on that a bit, but they came back from the Christmas holidays with this January 30th deadline. And we all know Congress has been pretty divisive and divided over the last couple of years with everything going on, but they've actually made a pretty good run at getting these appropriations bills done. We saw another package come out this morning. They're calling them mini buses, where they're packaging 2 to 4 bills together. They've already passed 2 of those. One was part of when they came out of the shutdown. Another one they passed about a week ago. And then the financial services and general government, which has IRS, Treasury in it, they passed that out of the House last week. It still needs to be passed by the Senate. So they're actually making progress and have been doing some productive work amongst all the craziness with everything that's happening in the news.
See on TV, yeah. And just for point of reference, depending on when you're listening to this, we're recording this on, what is today, January the 20th.
20th.
So if you're not listening to this till sometime in February, you might know the answer to these questions, that we're speculating on. So I guess the big thing, let's ask, so your opinion, will we have a government shutdown, yes or no? And if we do, for God's sakes, what does that impact the filing season? Or, that's probably the first thing that our listeners are worried about.
For a few reasons. One, the progress that we've made the last couple weeks. Two, that folks felt, I think, worn out by the members of Congress, felt worn out by the last shutdown and don't really want to have another one of those.
Right.
I think we will not have another government shutdown on January 30th. They're making good progress. I joked before the show that we probably won't have one unless we invade Greenland this week.
Yeah.
There've been a few
anything's possible.
There've been a few things that have complicated things happening totally smoothly. One is what's going on out in Minneapolis with ICE and the murder that happened out there and the associated violence and all of that. And then two, the Greenland kind of foreign policy stuff, even Venezuela to a degree, have complicated things a bit. So two of the bills impacted by that. One is the Homeland Security bill.
Right.
Democrats aren't in a mood to throw a lot of extra money at Homeland Security right now. And then similar with foreign operations and the State Department. But those, I think, they're working themselves out. They did propose a Homeland Security bill. But, those issues aside, they've actually got a lot of bipartisan agreement on the bills that have come out. Now, Democrats don't necessarily love the bills, and we can talk about the IRS budget a little bit. They don't necessarily love it, but they're willing to go along with it in order to not have another government shutdown. And, if we were, to your question, if we were to have a government shutdown, we did see the IRS maintain a decent level of operations during the fall shutdown. They were actually answering the phones, of course, not as frequently. Some things that were paused, like audits and, other stuff. But there was a level of taxpayer service that we haven't seen in past shutdowns. And the IRS always has two plans, one for tax season or filing season and one for non-filing season. And so since this would be in the filing season, they would maintain even a more robust, staffing. So there would definitely be an impact. It definitely wouldn't be an ideal time to have a shutdown for the IRS.
But at least returns would be processed and refunds issued, right? That's.
I think they would maintain a decent level of staff to do those things.
Yeah. Only in America can an invasion of Greenland affect how you file your taxes.
Well, we've got 10 days. Today's the 20th. We have till Friday the 30th. So I guess anything could happen.
But you seem pretty optimistic that we're not going to go through another shutdown, and which is good for all of us.
For sure.
Despite let's assume the government is open. It still could be an interesting filing season, Thad. What do you think about what should we expect? What from the IRS? We'll talk about, I guess there's three people. We'll talk about the IRS's perspective, tax professionals' perspective, and taxpayers. Yeah. What should we all expect?
So coming, the first year of the Trump presidency, we obviously saw DOGE and other efforts to really streamline government agencies, bureaucracies, incentivize early retirements, all of that stuff. At the IRS, as most folks know, there were a lot of people eligible for retirement. There were a lot of people that had been there a long time. And so more so than at the end of the day, laying people off, a lot of it was people taking it because of the uncertainty of what might happen, people taking these early buyouts, these incentives, and either retiring early or just agreeing to leave the agency. And as a result, about 25% of the staff at the IRS left. I think the number was like 30,000 employees, something like that. And those tended to be more seasoned folks that have more experience. And so that leaves, a bit of a hole or vacuum in terms of, they don't have the staff or the expertise that they did this time last year.
Right.
All of that said, when when we've been talking to tax professionals, most folks have said that the level of service they haven't seen a dramatic drop. It's not like it's fallen off a cliff or anything. Now we haven't been through a full tax season yet.
Right.
Right.
And so I think there's nervousness. I think there's uncertainty around what will the impacts around this be. There have been technology improvements, so they're using different technologies, including AI,
Mhm.
to make things more efficient. And so at this point, the verdict's out. I think we haven't seen a dramatic decline in service, but people are nervous.
Well, with all the new tax legislation too, that's another hurdle. But you're right.
Absolutely.
Guidance.
And that
You know,
and that and we can talk. I know you guys have been talking about that, but we can talk separately about that too. But there's a lot of employers out there that are, whenever a bill like this passed, people want more clarity, more guidance.
Mhm.
It's never quite enough. But when you have a retroactive provisions like we're seeing with overtime and with tips, I'm sure you guys are getting, questions from your clients. We're even getting questions from our clients saying, for instance, like our firm represents a lot of local governments. We have folks saying, hey, our employees are asking us for more direction on how to claim overtime for 2025, but we don't have all the data, or we don't, we know
Right.
we don't have to give them all this, but we want to be helpful. And so helping folks navigate that, there's no perfect answer right now, but it is creating, I think, nervousness, and Treasury and the IRS have been scrambling to get out as much guidance as they can, but they're understaffed as well. They went through the shutdown as well, and so sort of it adds another layer of
I'm not really expecting more guidance. Do you think we'll get guidance? More something
you know,
new?
I don't think on 2025 we
Yeah,
will.
okay.
Now
That's what I'm thinking too.
I think there's still going to be more on 26 through 28. And that's
yeah.
obviously prospective. Now we're already in 26, but folks can start, using the FLSA definition to make sure that they have all the overtime tracked, and employers know they're going to have to report that in a more formal way going forward. And so hopefully folks are getting ready for that. I know, payroll firms and others are, but for 2025, I think the guidance they put out, they tried to put a lot of flexibility in there and basically said,
Oh
hey,
yeah.
we know it's not going to be perfect. Just figure it
Yeah.
out and we won't penalize you, is essentially what they said. But, that makes people uncomfortable because they say, well, if it's not perfect, how do we know? People are still worried
Yeah.
about liability and stuff, even though they've got some safe harbors in there.
Right. They're like, it's whatever's reasonable. And then the very next question is, well, define reasonable. Like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
tell me
Exactly.
what that means. I feel sorry for some of the HR departments where the employees are coming in like, you're HR, you're supposed to tell me what to do. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I got to tell you a funny story. I was in a restaurant and the waitress knew what I did for a living. So she comes up with her W-2 and she says, first of all, can you show me where my tips are on this W-2? And I said, yeah, it's right over here. It's in this box right there. So what do I do about it? How do I get my money? And then the next question, and we can talk about this if we want to, says, well, I don't want this big refund. I want to get it in each paycheck. How do I go about that? I said, well, I can't help you with that. That's a different discussion. You need to go talk to, figure out how to do a new W-4 form. When I don't think I can do that over lunch. Explain that to
right.
me. So,
Wow.
yeah. So I guess we know they did release. I think I saw this week. Andy, correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't they release the new 2026 W-2 already and some instructions for
Yeah,
next year?
it was a draft, but now it's finalized. So
Yeah.
the instructions for the W-2 for 2026 is out, and we have the W-4 out for 2026 as well. So there's changes on obviously on both of those affecting 2026. So yeah, and that's another thing. The tax practitioners are going to have to talk to their clients about making these adjustments on their W-4 for those in the industries of overtime and tips. So, and that's a whole nother, meeting or tax planning advisory type thing to sit down with your clients and adjust those W-4s so they are getting for 2026 more money in their paycheck. 2025 is what it is. You're getting it when you file your 2025 tax return.
Yeah, I told her, and I'm serious about it. I said, if the W-4 is so complicated, you could go through all this trouble of filling it out, and they could actually take out more tax than they're taking out now because you didn't get some question or answer right. So don't just assume filling out this form fixes the problem. Monitor it and look
Yeah.
at it. And again, their paychecks tend to vary, so it's kind of hard. It's not like if every week I was getting $100 taken out, I could look to see that it dropped to 75. I mean, here, based on how busy the restaurant is and how many tips I get, I mean, I think it's going to be a challenge, but hey.
Well, on the state side too, I mean, in Texas where I am, there's no state income tax, but if you had to navigate, well, what's the difference between my state withholding adjustments that need to be made and my federal adjustments that need to be made, and that can depend on the state. So that's another issue.
Yeah, I mean, some states, as you guys know, some states are taking legislative action to try to do something similar to what the federal government's doing. And then some states are not doing that. And then it's become a political fight, of course,
Sure.
in terms of, I think President Trump has sort of called out some states that aren't doing it, saying, why aren't you implementing this tax break? But,
Am I correct, Thad? I think some states just automatically follow the federal law. I mean, it's just they don't have to do anything. When the federal changes, their state law says we'll just follow the federal, and others have to actually go past something or do something. So, I mean, we could be all over the board on what the states do, depending on whether they do nothing and it automatically happens, or whether they have to go actually in session. And what is it? Texas, Annie doesn't meet but once every 3 years or something. I mean,
It's something like that. I don't exactly know where we are on the cycle of the 3-year period, but you know, it could be very difficult for somebody to navigate the differences between, making adjustments on the state and then making adjustments on the feds. But
well, it's possible by the time the state legislature in Texas meets, the law's already expired. I mean, so, I mean, it's, but
then you gotta wait for the software to be updated. I mean, the 26th, everybody knows the 26th is filing season's open, for federal, but that doesn't mean that the form is gonna be ready to go or your software is gonna be able to e-file that form yet. So there could be some delays. The Schedule 1A is new this year, but, that's been out, but the softwares have to update that. There's a bunch of things that the software is going to have to take care of, warning people about, you have to use banking information. You can't get a refund check. There are going to be some prompts in the software that are going to be new, that are going to require going back to the client or making some sort of adjustment. So it could be, more tedious on the tax practitioner side, and you might be waiting for a certain form to, be approved by the software company. All the software companies, they go through their process of getting the forms approved, and they're not all the same. So you may see, I don't know, Pro Series or Lacert or somebody's, got the form approved and you can e-file, but another tax practitioner using a different software might be another week. It might be another 2 weeks before their form is approved. So
and that's going
also
to take some managing of clients, because they're going to say, well, my friend went to so-and-so and
Right.
they've already got their refund, and you tell me I can't even file my return yet. So, and again, that's where those differences have a real world effect on how we deal with customers. So yeah, it's going to, but I guess then you're saying you think we'll have a filing season. You think it'll be, I don't want to say normal, because didn't they also cut their budget? I mean, you
well,
talked
so I
about
was about
the
to say
people.
that. So when you ask about how's the filing season going to go, another kind of macro thing we're watching is this budget bill. So the bill I said that passed the House on Wednesday and is expected to pass the Senate next week, it cuts the IRS budget by about a little over $1 billion, down to, I think it's 11.2 billion. The current level is 12.3 billion. And so that's a significant cut. I think it's like a 9% cut, something like that, for FY26. So for what we're in right now, it could have been a lot worse. The president had initially called for like a $3 billion cut. The House had called for like a $3 billion cut. So people were kind of cheering that the Senate won out in the negotiations and it wasn't a worse cut. The one silver lining, I think, that Democrats are took some comfort in, and I took some comfort in, although it's hard to know exactly how this fits in, is there is still Inflation Reduction Act money left over. In March, a report came out from TIGTA that said they had $22 billion left in Inflation Reduction Act money, and that's after they had, clawed some of it back and repealed some of it. They've spent a lot of that. I know they've continued with some of the technology upgrades. They used some of it to fund the first 5 business days of the shutdown. So I don't know what that exact number is, but I think it's still in the billions. And on certain things, they can dip into that, whether it's technology or maybe even some service areas.
Yeah, explain that. Well, I mean, that's, why is that money always in this pot? Why was there something when that was first appropriated that it wasn't subject to future cuts or something? Because I've seen that all over the place. I was going to ask you that, and you brought it up. When I see, we're tapping into that money, I said, well, what is it, in a separate bank account? I mean, why is it still?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was, when the Inflation Reduction Act passed, they got roughly 80 billion, and they had 9 years to spend it. And a lot of it was enforcement, and then some of it was technology, some of it was operations and all of this. And then they rolled back a big chunk of that,
Right.
Through two different bills.
Okay.
And one of the big complaints was, well, all this money's for enforcement. We really need it for technology and stuff. Well, the reason they made it for enforcement was because that's how they got the quote unquote pay for the Inflation Reduction Act. So if you enforce taxes, you raise revenue, and it paid for the tax bill, right? But I've always said enforcement is a broad term, right? You can use, I mean, it's for enforcement, but you can improve technology around enforcement. You can improve customer service around enforcement, that kind of thing. But anyway, they've got this bucket of money, and it is a separate account, and they can draw down on it, and they've got 9 years to spend it. It's no year money. It doesn't expire at the end of this year or anything.
Right.
So I think it gives them a little more flexibility. And so, that's not going to be there forever. I think if they didn't have that, if you saw $1 billion cut, you might have, layoffs or something kind of severe, but this provides a little bit of a cushion.
So it doesn't go away. Congress could take it back, but they would have to do something.
And they've already taken a big chunk of it back.
Yeah.
But there's still some left.
Is that where they bought the guns for the 84,000 people that they put on the streets?
And if they don't spend it in 9 years, it goes away.
Okay.
But it's only been
Let's be honest. Yeah. I think we could spend it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no way
Spending doesn't seem to be our problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Damn, look, we left $1 billion over there. What do we get?
Yeah.
That ain't never going to happen.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I wondered about that. I wondered why that money, because every time you turn on the TV or radio or you read an article, it's like, we just got some Inflation Reduction Act money left. And I said, how's that possible? Oh, well, thanks for explaining that.
One of the things Danny Werfel used to argue is, like, long term, when that money runs out, it was sort of billed as a one-time deal and all the things would be fixed. But there's actually technology issues and workforce issues that he was arguing they're going to need sort of another wave of big dollars like that. That's not coming in the current, political environment. So we'll just have to see long term how that plays out.
No.
Yeah. Well, I've been seeing that we're getting big refunds this year. Everybody's expecting a higher refund than in the past. So I know some of that's driven by some of the new legislation that's retroactive, but let's. I mean, I'm game for bigger refunds. I mean, I vote yes for that. Hopefully.
Well, we saw that. What was interesting is the student loan. I don't know if y'all saw this student loan announcement at the end of
last week.
Yeah. But they had, basically under COVID, they had stopped collecting on defaulted student loans. And in May, the Trump administration turned back on the offset. So basically, if you're defaulted on a student loan, if the government owed you money, like a tax refund, they would hold that and it would go towards paying off the loan. It was an offset. And so that had been turned back on, and they were kind of slowly ramping it up. But it was, this tax season was supposed to be on, and it was sort of the first step in starting to collect again on defaulted student loans. Well, they announced the end of last week that they were going to delay that and not do that. And apparently the political, reason coming out of the White House was all these affordability concerns and them touting that people were going to get larger refunds. They were worried that all of a sudden all these larger refunds were going to go to pay the defaulted student loans, and people were going to, be angry.
Panic, yeah.
And so it's, it's a little ironic because they had just been hounding the Biden did something similar several times where they kept delaying the student loan stuff because they always had an election or something coming up. And Republicans were just going after them saying, this is transparent while you're doing this. Well, now the Trump administration's done the same thing, which is kind of like, probably not a good time to turn this on. People are worried about affordability. We're touting high refunds. Let's let the people get their refunds. We won't have these go towards that. So that was another part of this. But yeah, with the no tax on tips and overtime and other
senior credit and
they've been touting people are going to get higher tax refunds, and I think that I imagine that'll be the case for a lot of people because
it should be.
No one changed their withholdings at the end of the year last year. I mean, this is, all coming in.
So you're not insinuating that politics plays some part in tax policy, are you? And that these refunds, this is a midterm election year, so it's a pretty good year to be handing out big refunds. So
exactly,
you don't think any of that had any? This was all just let's do the best for tax policy here. Let's just make sure that all of this is because it's good for the country.
Yeah. I think the official line was we're standing up new systems, we're still digging out of the Biden hole, this kind of stuff. And it's going to take us a little more time.
Yeah.
It's, big refunds coming right before a midterm election. And if you take it even further, these things expire right before the next presidential election.
Some of them expire in 28. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's politics that are playing the game because it's midterms. Does that just basically shut down any other legislation? I know you hear ramblings about tax things being talked about, but in the political environment we have on a regular basis, and now we're into a midterm year. Anything possible? Is there anything we need to keep an eye out for? Could they throw us a curveball in the middle of filing season?
It's a great question. So there are a couple different, I guess, buckets of possible things out there. One of the most immediate is these ACA premium tax credits.
Right.
They ended up through a discharge petition where they got a majority of signatures in the House. They did have a vote. I think that was 2 weeks ago in the House, and passed out a 3-year extension for the ACA credits. That went over to the Senate. That was never going to pass in the Senate as is, but they were negotiating, and there was talk last week about coming out with a compromise. I mean, I think they were very close to coming out with a compromise on these ACA credits. There was still some small disagreements, and then Trump came out with his own plan, which basically said, let's not do the tax credits. Let's just send subsidies to people that they can use to
offset
to pay for their premiums. So that's kind of been put on hold. I think the negotiator said we're not going to have anything before the end of January. I think there's some concern, even though they were getting close, that could fall apart. But if that had happened, that would have been a potential vehicle for either some other healthcare provisions or even tax provisions. There's some things that expired, extenders that expired at the end of the year, things like the WOTC, the work opportunity tax credit expired. There's some niche things around like film credits and racetrack credits and that kind of target certain industries. So of course there's interests that are pushing to get those things extended.
Sure.
That takes bipartisan cooperation and a vehicle, two things that we're short on right now. So I don't know if any of that comes together. The other thing is Republicans could do another reconciliation bill, like the One Big Beautiful Bill, where they just pass something party lines, and there is a group of Republicans, especially in the House, that are saying, why wouldn't we do this? Why wouldn't we take advantage of this and just get some other priorities through before we potentially, lose seats in the midterm? And so Speaker Johnson even came out last week and said he wanted to do that. Trump's kind of been on both sides of that, but I saw that Crapo and Senator Crapo, who chairs the Senate Finance Committee, he came out and said, not really interested in that.
This ain't happening.
One of the things is some of the conservatives in the House would like to drive more savings to lower the deficit through that, which, they were talking about save another $1 trillion for the government, which means cuts.
Right.
And which means, Medicare or Medicaid cuts. And there were
none
folks
of which are
that
really
felt like
popular.
the last bill didn't go far enough, and we need to go back and finish the job. Well, with moderate senators, that's very unpopular, and moderates in the House too, where you've got a very thin majority right now, very thin. So now if President Trump got all in behind it and they tailored it, to some specific issues, is it possible that they could do another reconciliation bill? I think it is possible, but it has a number of challenges. So, there's a possibility we get some legislation one way or another this year, but the closer you get to the election, the harder
it is. Did I see something that there seems to be some bipartisan support for doing something with the child tax credit? Could that happen on its own, or is it just like going to get thrown into the bucket with everything else?
I think it gets thrown in the bucket. I think you need a vehicle. That child tax credit is very popular, but then it ends up costing money, right?
Right.
So it's how do you pay for it? And then that's where it gets a little more complicated, but it does have strong bipartisan support.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about a bill later, but explain to people when you mean it needs a vehicle, because I think the three of us know what that means. But the idea that you and I, if we were in Congress, came up with this bill and we're just going to run into the House or run into the Senate and say, hey, I got a bill, let's vote on it and see how. That's not how it. Maybe that's how it used to work, but that's not how it works anymore.
What's funny is we've seen a few small little tax bills. Like there was one on math notices, making them.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
It became law, but most of that stuff passes unanimously. It's like they put it on. It passes the House either unanimously or overwhelmingly, because the House can do a vote very quickly.
Right.
And then in the Senate, you can pass something in 5 seconds if it's unanimous. You call it up and you say, does this have unanimous consent? If nobody objects, you can pass it really quickly. Most things can't pass unanimously, or for whatever reason, they decide not to do it that way. And it takes a lot of time, like to file cloture on a bill, to allow, hours of debate. I mean, it can take 3 days, a week, if you allow amendment process.
Go back and forth. And
rather than just have one small bill and say, we're going to go through this process, it's sort of open, especially in the Senate, it opens up a can of worms where people are attaching all kinds of amendments and all kinds of stuff. So what they tend to do is these big packages, like you have a spending bill and, they'll call them like a Christmas tree or something, because they'll just start adding ornaments, like, well, if this is moving, let's throw this, this tax extender on there, or and so that's what we mean when we say a vehicle. It's a big train that's moving, and everyone starts trying to get their piece of legislation. And then it's hard not to pass it because it's got stuff in there that has to pass,
Right.
And so you don't get bogged down by all the provisions you don't like, because there's one in there you really like.
So when we start seeing all these ads in around election time saying, I introduced a bill to do this and that, most of those bills never saw the light of day. That's just, they wrote one and they put it out there and everybody said, that's nice.
I forget the stat, but I mean, so many bills, thousands of bills get introduced every year. A very small number become law. But Congress is also one of these wait, and then things happen really fast. And so I'm always careful to say something's not going to happen or it's not going to pass, because it'll seem like it's dead, and then all of a sudden something will come together and they'll start, and I mean, we saw COVID was an exception, but we saw that during COVID where they just started passing all kinds of stuff so fast,
And sometimes that creates problems, as we learned during COVID, that the rush to do something quickly doesn't allow enough time to really think it out and think through it. And the consequences of a small mistake can be billions of dollars.
And I know we've talked about this before on the show, but the big, beautiful bill, I was a skeptic that this was going to come together as quick as they said, because there were so many complicated parts. But at the end of the day, it was about Trump's political, power to be able to push this thing through, and basically members sort of held their nose for the provisions they didn't like and got it done because there was all this political pressure to get it done, and they got it done quicker than folks had imagined.
Yeah, we had a
I feel like they get the momentum going, and then all of a sudden it can go, I guess, as fast as it can just die too. I don't
Yep,
know.
exactly.
and it can be a news event. It can be, I mean, anything can start or stop some of these things. I mean,
Yep.
we joked about Greenland, but I mean, that's the truth. I mean, something sour the mood in the House, the Senate, or both, and everything that was agreed on is no longer agreed on.
We're seeing this with Senator Tillis in North Carolina a little bit. So Senator Tillis announced that he's, during the tax debate, announced that he was going to retire, and so he's not running for reelection. And he's the deciding vote on a number of committees. He's on Finance Committee now. He's on Banking Committee. And so he does not like some of the things Trump is doing with Greenland and some other issues. And he's basically said, I'm going to use this deciding committee vote to cause problems if this continues. And so that
I'm going to show you what I can do.
Exactly. And he's not up for reelection. He's not worried about
being popular.
So, and that's another thing we're watching. How does that impact some of this? Because when it gets harder, when folks start defecting from your own party,
Well, the margins, particularly in the House, isn't it down to like one or two people? And there's been some deaths and retirements, and
yeah,
I mean, it's almost
last week. I mean, it was literally, I think, one or two, because there were a few members who had one. Derek Van Orden, his wife was ill, and so he couldn't come. We had a congressman who got in a bad car accident.
Oh.
We had a congressman who passed away, and so it's literally, if one or two more things happen, you could have a shift in majority, and so it's about as narrow as it gets. And then you kind of turn, every member could become a Joe Manchin, where they say, well, actually, I'm not going to vote for this unless I get that,
if the Democrat, if some Republicans dropped out and the majority flipped from Democrats to Republicans, does Jeffries automatically become speaker, or does Mike Johnson still stay, or do they have to do a vote, or how does that work? Just when
you're saying in the House, if Dems take,
if due to retirements or illness or car wrecks or whatever,
it would switch. They would have to elect
a new speaker. Okay,
but
so it'd be an election.
Switch it midterm, and that's happened. I mean, I know that's happened in the Senate. We saw that with Daschle, where you had a party change. It was basically 50-50, and someone switched parties, and they now sometimes in the Senate, when it's 50-50, they do kind of like a power sharing agreement to, they didn't completely give up all the power, but yeah, the House could shift, and you could see it shift back and forth, which would be a little crazy.
Yeah, but they do have to have a vote. But we know how those votes come out.
Yeah.
They're pretty. All right, Thad, you want me to come to Washington this week? Why?
Yeah, so there are a couple things we've been working on for a long time. One is minimum standards for tax preparers, things like a required background check, required CE credits, the ability for IRS to take away a P10 if someone's doing fraudulent stuff. Right now, it's basically impossible for them to regulate any of that because of what the courts have said in terms of their authority. And so they need legislation that gives them some authority to sort of take care of the bad actors and provide some just basic minimum standards. So you can't have, a criminal or someone that's just totally incompetent hang a shingle and start preparing taxes for someone. And so, this bill has kind of been out there for a while, but it was recently reintroduced by Congressman Jimmy Panetta from California and Greg Steube from Florida, a Republican from Florida. So it's a bipartisan bill. And we're trying to build support for that in the House, get some new co-sponsors, build some momentum around it. And so that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. There's also Crapo and Wyden in the Senate have their big draft bill where this is sort of the centerpiece of that. But the concern is that the House will be a little harder. And so we're mainly going to focus on the House. And so that's sort of the big piece of legislation we're going to be talking about. But of course, there's also all these IRS issues, all these implementation with Big Beautiful Bill. People, we want to be in constant contact. They want to hear what we think and make sure, we're communicating.
Right.
And so that's sort of the goal. So we've got Roger and then a few members from the NAEA, the National Association of Enrolled Agents. And we're just going to kind of, work the Hill, meet with a lot of folks and see if we can make this one of the bills that
that actually gets passed,
to hitch a ride if we do have some tax administration legislation.
And I think it's important. Andy, talk a little bit about, we see it all the time in our offices where we're playing fix it man or woman to a mistake that, an unprepared, and I've said this a lot, unscrupulous and uneducated can get you to the same spot, whether you did it on purpose or by accident.
Yep.
If it's wrong, it's still wrong. And Andy, talk about what it takes. ERC is a great example of how to clean this up.
ERC, but there's so many, child tax credit, EIC, all these types of meaningful credits and deductions and legislation. If the Joe Blow down the street is helping out a client, he may not even intentionally know that he's making a mistake, or may not be aware of some caveat, so to say. But we do get a lot of taxpayers who receive notices about their tax return and then come to one of our Padgett offices, who then have to not only educate the taxpayer, like, well, this is what happened, but then remedy the situation, which sometimes can be difficult to do and also can be costly. But on the flip side, there are preparers out there. Like, if you want to if you want to get the ERC and your tax preparer is like, hey, you don't qualify, there's going to be somebody down the block that'll do it for you. So it hits both ways. The good tax professionals who stay educated, who are in the know, who participate, in these IRS forums and such, they are correcting errors, or they're losing business because somebody will do it wrong for their client. Anyway, so it's a tough place to be in, and I'm obviously a proponent of regulating tax preparers, just like other industries. I don't want to go to a doctor that doesn't know what they're doing. I don't want to go to a physical therapist that doesn't have the qualifications or the education. So I think it's needed. It's been hard to actually get past, but I'm glad that you guys are going up there next week, and maybe something will come about it. It's really important for the taxpayers to feel confident in who they're going to prepare their tax returns or get tax advice from. And it's it would be more comforting to know, okay, I at least know they hit the minimum standards,
Right.
Or have some sort of somebody to answer to prove that they know what they're doing.
And I've said this long, and I believe it. I think a lot of taxpayers assume that's already in place. That,
and that could be the case too. You're right.
And even members of Congress, we talk to people high up on, you sit next to them at one of these lunches or something, and I tell them about the bill, and there's like, that's not already the case. Like, sure, it's not. And so educating people about that. Most people believe it's common sense. Now, for reasons that I don't think are very good ones, sometimes it does become more complicated than that.
Yeah, what is I was going to say, everybody in our industry probably is for it, but then you go back in Loving, and it was actually somebody in our industry that kicked out
Thought
the
it
one
was
we had.
overreach. Yeah.
So what is the, help me get ready for these meetings. What are the objections to doing this?
There are libertarian groups out there that don't want to regulate any industry. I don't know about doctors and lawyers and stuff, but this idea, there was a time when certain industries were just creating all these certifications and regulations because they wanted to keep
make money
people out, keep competitors out.
Yeah.
And there was an effort like the Koch brothers funded a lot of these things to try to tear down these barriers to entry for different industries. And so this case, when IRS started regulating tax preparers, there's this case that went to the DC Circuit, Loving versus the IRS, where that was funded by some of these groups saying, let's not let the IRS overreach here and start regulating. They don't have the authority. And so, most people have gotten over that. Like, most people agree this is not, a dog groomer or something like that.
Yeah.
Where we need to put up like, we need to say this is ridiculous. Why would you regulate this? But there's still, there's still a bit of a hangover where some people like, oh, I thought we weren't for this. We don't want to drive up the price of service and that kind of thing. Well, but if you talk to someone like the Taxpayer Advocate, I mean, they've done studies. They've shown that something like the Earned Income Tax Credit, something like over 90% of the mistakes or fraud come from folks that are not CPAs, enrolled agents, or certified tax professionals. And so the stats bear it out. Like folks that have the credentials do not make the same kind of errors that folks that don't. But hopefully we can get over those, hurdles and keep educating folks. And
Well, let's be honest, the legislation's not getting any simpler. The
Yeah.
more complex, the more likely for error, and
Yep,
social
yep.
media is
Oh,
not
absolutely.
helping, and AI is beneficial, but only if it can be trustworthy.
Well,
Um,
and ERTC was a good example because folks saw the fraud that went on around that, and the fraud did not come from the reputable
No.
no.
firms. It came from these mills or folks that stood these businesses up for 6 months and that kind of thing. And so that's one of the examples we use is, as Congress does different things to address one crisis or another, you can't just let it becomes a free for all if anyone can do this.
And I think this is more important maybe now than it has been in before, because we already talked about the IRS has fewer resources to do audits and to do enforcement, whatever that means. So we're kind of the first, or how you want to look at it, first or last line of defense. And if you just let people be rogue and do whatever they want to make a client happy with no fear of ever having repercussions, who knows? I mean, I would love if somebody could actually put a calculator to the cost to the Treasury of poorly prepared tax returns by people who either did it intentionally or just because they were a truck driver on Tuesday and a tax preparer on Wednesday,
Well, the IRS does put out educational material, but I'm sure that's taken a hit too. The webinars and the online courses and the information released to the public to keep them informed probably has taken a hit too with cutbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, it's, again, to me, you said it's common sense. I would think most everybody listening to this and everybody in our industry would agree with it, but that's one of the crazy things about our business in Washington is it may make perfect sense and everybody might agree to it, but getting it to actually become law is I don't know, seems overly complicated to me.
Yeah.
What else we got, Annie? We're about to run out of time.
Yeah, we're almost to the top of the hour, but I do want your opinion, Thad, on. So I've heard more through just communities and groups talking about this no paper check. I mean, come on, the IRS is going to take my money if I write a check, I assume. But I understand that they're saying now for refunds that they want banking information. Are you hearing chatter like I mean, it makes simple sense to me, right? But I have a bank account. I've been doing banking, but I understand that there's a population out there that really may not have banking information or fear of giving it to someone to use.
I think the response has been mixed. I mean, I think a lot of associations and groups and large companies have been pushing IRS to modernize, become more electronic, to do more electronic payments, to do more electronic filing. all of that stuff for years, right?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
when the president came out with this executive order, and it was kind of in the spirit of Doge and all that about let's make things
Right.
more efficient and more, streamlined and all of that. When I saw it, my thought was, this is what we've been asking for. This is
Great. Yeah.
great, right? Like you got to push, you can't just expect it to happen. It'll gradually happen, but you kind of got to put some incentive or some push to really speed things up. Now that said, then people start raising the concerns about, well, I represent a native tribe, and
They're
they're
unbanked.
not able to
Yeah.
do this,
Yeah.
or I have elderly clients, and all that's understandable. And I do think that they've been relatively sensitive to that. They had an open comment period. They had a date that this was all going to be implemented by, and they kind of came out with some language around, that's still our goal, but we're going to still accept paper checks for now, and we're
Sure.
going to try to
Certain
move,
exceptions.
certain exceptions. And so, and then sort of the process of how, well, if there's a bank account on file, and how is that verified, and how does the back and forth go between, taxpayers and the IRS around that process. There's been some details in that I know that folks have commented on, or that need to be sort of refined a little bit. But, I don't get worked up about this, because I think this is kind of, part of the push and pull of modernization.
Mhm.
People are always going to be like, what, you won't take my check, or you won't do,
Yeah, they
Right.
will.
and I think for now they will take your check.
Yeah.
And I think that, I've worked on legislation that have like done things like really, I'm helping with a bill now that really focuses on incentivizing e-filing for businesses, like with the 941, 940
Right.
and stuff, and we put a bunch of exceptions in there. Like if you have a cyber hack, or if you live in an area that's got no broadband, there's things you can do, because of course you're going to have some congressman that's like, well, most of my constituents don't have broadband. I can't do this. So you want to
Yeah.
allow, but at the end of the day, if we're going to modernize the IRS, you're going to
You-
have to have you didn't have to help push things along.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm not a practitioner, but that's sort of from a policy perspective, that's where I come from it. But I know that there are practitioners that have, legitimate concerns.
Would that be because if you go back to when the only way we got anywhere near to the level of e-filing we have now is they mandated or put some 80-20 rule or something. I mean, it just kind of compelled you to have to do it, whether you
Yep.
wanted to or not. But they put the pressure on practitioners more than taxpayers. Is your bill going to address practitioners or taxpayers, or both? I mean, I'm just thinking, if I were going to compile businesses to do something, but I don't have, I do my own payroll. I'm small. I got one person. Are you compelling the business to do it, or if they engage
So
someone like
actually,
us?
this bill that I've been working on, it's called the e-file Act, and it was just introduced. Congresswoman Malliotakis is the lead Republican, and then Swazi and Morelli from New York are the lead Democrats. It's not a mandate. It actually provides a $1,000 tax credit if you're an employer, if you're a small business owner, so you're an employer, to file electronically. Now, some people say, well, isn't everybody doing that?
No.
940, 941s, only about half of businesses are filing electronically. Now, on the individual side, it's up to like 97%
Right.
now. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really high, and that's where a lot of the push has been from the IRS. And so this would provide a credit for a few years, and then eventually there would be a small filing fee if you did it on paper.
Okay. I like that idea.
Yep. And so I can share that. I'll share that with you. And
Yeah, $1,000. Yeah, that'll get somebody that's,
yeah,
because a lot of it's
well,
just laziness. I mean, I've always done it this way. I don't want to go through the authorization and all that stuff.
similar to the retirement bill, Secure Act 1.0 and 2.0. They did these small tax credits for small businesses to try to incentivize things like automatic enrollment
Mhm.
and, offering different retirement benefits. So it said, all right, if you sign up your employees for automatic enrollment, we'll give you 500 credit per employee, things like that. And so, it's not a lot of money, but it actually drives behavior because the accountant will say to the firm, oh, why don't you do this? And we can save you a little money on your
Here's
payroll.
$10,000. Because I can tell you right now of situations where the state has mandated that all the payroll stuff for the state be filed electronically. Social Security has mandated that the W-2s be filed electronically, but they're still filing the 940, 941 on paper.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
mandate, it would be another way. And some states mandated on I think on the employer payroll tax return. But
yeah,
the problem is with the mandate is sometimes you'll have groups, whether NFIB or, the AARP or someone will say, well, we don't need mandates on small businesses, which I get.
Yeah.
And so the idea of this bill is, all right, it's not a mandate. Let's make it an incentive,
Sure. Well, I like that. Well, we should figure out though,
too.
if I have to do the states, and I do, I have to do the W-2s and 1099s, and I do.
Yeah.
What is the hurdle that's keeping me from doing those other two forms? Why don't I just naturally do those? Because I think there's a lot of people in that boat because the other fees are mandated. I'd love to know what is the reason that behavior is still out there. Because it would seem to me if you're doing all that electronically, why wouldn't you just do these? But they're not.
And not to go too far on this because I know we're at the top of the hour, but the 941X, as you guys know, had to be filed on paper. And, and during ERTC, when you filed, that's the amended 941, when folks had to file that to claim the that's when we had all these backlogs of paper at the IRS and during COVID. And, if everything had been electronic, that process
would have been very different.
Very different. Very different.
Very different.
Yeah.
You're right.
All right, Thad. Thank you. I'll see you in a couple of days.
All right.
Andy,
this has been great.
Take us home.
No, this is great. 10 days out from the 30th of January, we'll see what happens there. The start of filing season, 6 days away. So we'll see how that gets kicked off and watch and see what kind of stats we get from refunds and people paying by check or getting refund banking information. So this will be interesting. We'll have to have you back at the end of tax season and get your feeling on how it went. But
see how it
went.
went.
That sounds awesome. Would love to. Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you,
you're
Thad.
welcome.
See you in a couple of days. Annie, thanks as always. This has been good. I hope people enjoyed it. Any final comments, Annie? Close us out.
I'm good. I just say, keep watching. We'll be bringing you everything we have. And if you haven't subscribed, tell a friend and follow us on our Federal Tax Update podcast. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Thad.
Thanks, Annie. Bye, everybody.